Well, Larry has just done more traveling than anyone can imagine. So
Fantastic.
he's just the perfect person to write about it. And he's a very, very clear, concise writer, too, in my opinion. I had the honor of helping do some test reading for his books, and my red pen was very idle. It didn't have very much to do.
In other words, he writes so well he needs very little editing.
Exactly.
He has the books there available, of course, on Amazon. But I also assume maybe that there's going to be some audio books, or are there already audio books out?
I don't think he's done that yet, but that's a great question to ask him about.
I will. Tell me a little bit about True North. I guess, of course, in proofreading it and editing it, you are familiar a little bit with some of it. I know he's traveled to 36 different countries. He had a 137-day trip. Yes,
and that's the most recent. That's True North 3, which was an around-the-world trip. And then there's the original book, which was South America, Easter Island, and Antarctic. And then he's got True North 2, which was Central America and beyond, is under revision right now.
Oh, how exciting. What an adventure. So many different experiences.
Yes.
He's met a lot of fascinating people, and he's touched a lot of lives. What little that I've read so far, I can tell that he's made a major impact on a lot of people's lives, a meaningful impact. Yes,
I think that's a very good point. The word meaningful. I think that's what it all comes down to. Is what type of encounter is it? What level of encounter?
In fact, one of the things I'll be asking him about tonight is the blind girl in Ethiopia that he rescued from a garbage dump, I understand.
Yes, we just don't have any concept of what it's like. I mean, you have a bad day and it takes you an hour and a half to get home in traffic, and you think your life is just horrible. And we just don't have much of a clue compared to much of the world how incredibly fortunate and blessed we are.
Absolutely. In fact, in one of my groups, Cultural Debris, and maybe the Urban Lore group as well, I posted a thought along those lines a few months ago. My sister recently passed away, sort of suddenly and unexpectedly, in the Galveston, Texas area, and I traveled down there for the memorial service. And while I was staying in a beachside hotel room, I was thinking about all the things that we as Americans take for granted: the air conditioning, the lamp, the nightstand, the free breakfast, the electricity, everything being so convenient, the free Wi-Fi signal, things that in many, many third world countries would be considered living in luxury.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's really important to keep up a feeling of gratitude and giving thanks, and we can forget to do that.
Gratitude is one of the important vibrations within the universe, I think, that not only attracts more prosperity and abundance to us, but it sends a signal to those around us, too. And the gratitude thing raises other people's vibration as well.
I agree, Rich. That's a great point.
Now, you're doing a little writing as well, aren't you, Gwendolyn? You're working on something now as we speak, aren't you?
I am. I had the good fortune to have a short story called A Tiny Bow and Arrow be published in the Spiritual Writers Network, Best of 2014. And that was just really a pleasure.
So looking forward to that, Gwendolyn. Now we have West Washington State. Larry, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Good evening, Lawrence Cenotto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Your friend and I have been talking a little bit and gave you a brief introduction, but I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your travels, your journeys, the 137-day trip, the 36 countries, and, of course, your latest book, True North Volume 3.
Well, Rich, I have an overall introduction, but it's mainly statistical. If you can abide by that for a moment.
Absolutely.
It was really an incredible adventure. It's part of my book series, which is called True North, which is essentially about finding yourself. And the subtitle of this is The Ultimate Around the World Journey. And so that dealt with 137 days on an around the world ticket, and 36 countries, 38 air segments, 30,000 plus air miles, over 10,000 miles on the ground in Africa alone. That involved an awful lot of 15-passenger vans and buses and taxis and camels and all sorts of things. In addition to that, ground mileage in Europe, the Middle East, and the Far East, about 240 UNESCO-type World Heritage Sites. So that was averaging about 2 of those a day. Finished up strong with 5 days in North Korea. But the most interesting part for me and most fulfilling part was 3 life-changing interventions. And the first one was with a blind girl living in a garbage dump in Ethiopia. And then the second one was becoming the primary sponsor of 60 orphans in Rwanda as a result of a chance bus encounter. And then the final one was helping to liberate an American businessman who had been held political prisoner in Djibouti when he refused to give up his profitable business to the government there. And the government is one of the most corrupt on earth. And he refused to give up his business to the president and to some of his lackeys, and I was fortunate enough to run into him at the right time and help get him out of the country.
Oh, that's fantastic. It was a heroic act. I very much would like to hear more about all 3 instances, absolutely.
Well, which one do you want to hear about first?
Why don't we start out with the Ethiopian girl, Lawrence? Let's talk about the blind girl, and how did you come across her? How did that come about?
Well, I met a young man named John Johannes on Facebook, who had been introduced to me by mutual friends in Seattle. And John had told me about this girl and the circumstances that she was living in. And she was living in a hut, the likes of which you really can't imagine. It's made up of surplus bits of plastic and rocks at the base to try to keep the thing weighted down, and leftover umbrellas and straw and kind of whatever would work. And this was in a rain chute downhill from the garbage dump in Gondar in Ethiopia. And when it would rain, it would take all the, let's just call it what it is, all the feces from uphill, from humans and from animals, and take it through this chute and dump it right into her hut. And her being blind, she had to stay within a certain couple of feet of the doorway, and she really couldn't move and didn't know what was going on. And she was barefoot. And I had difficulty myself navigating this rocky slope, this rocky water chute, if you will, to get down to her place. I don't know how she did it, blind and barefoot. But each time that the rains would come, it would cover up her dishes and her belongings. And so I'd been told about how little she had, and I sent her some money ahead of time to buy some shoes for her kids and some jeans and some food and some dishes and blankets. She had no bed. And then when I got there to visit in person, I found out that all those people who were smiling at her every day and calling her one of their own and pretending to be affectionate and loving toward her were stealing from her. So all the things that I'd sent previous to that had been robbed. And it's probably the most angry that I became during the entire part of the trip, that her own people would do that to her when she was in such a helpless position. So essentially with John's help, I just moved her out and moved her into a one-room lockable room that had a compound. And they had a window and a light for her kids and fresh air, and there was no water chute, so to speak, and she was just very much protected. The thing I remember most was her wandering with her hand, feeling her way around the edge of the compound, and when she came to the running water, all of a sudden she burst out into this huge smile, and I had not seen her smile at all. But when she saw that she had running water and a shower and a bathroom, she was absolutely delighted.
That is incredible. The deplorable conditions that people in so many third world countries are living in, Americans have no concept unless they've traveled and seen it firsthand like you have, of the level of the depth of this. That's shocking.
Yeah, I honestly didn't really run into bathrooms as we Westerners know them until I got into Asia. Some of the more public places in Dubai, because Dubai is a very well-to-do country, had that. But in a lot of places, you just didn't have bathrooms as we know them. What you have is squat holes at the end of a tiled enclosure. And then they have a bucket of water, and you take that bucket of water and dip it into about a 55-gallon drum of water, and then you just take it and swash it over the whole floor and hope that it essentially takes the the residue of your work and empties it down a hole at the end. And that doesn't always happen. So it's you learn to take shower slaps, and you learn to take bathroom shoes when you make a trip like that.
I can imagine. Obviously, sanitation is not something that many of these countries have embraced yet.
No, you don't really see toilet paper most of the time, and you don't see soap to wash yourself. So what you end up doing is you taking that hand sanitizer in those little bottles. Probably took 20 bottles of those to begin with and went through just about all of them by the end of the 137 days. Really, really necessary, especially if you're going to be buying food on the road or roadside food or even in a restaurant, because a lot of times they won't have soap in their bathrooms.
What steps could be taken to alleviate some of these kind of conditions that exist?
Well, it's always good as part of your kit to carry the little moist towelettes, I think they're called, but they're sanitizer towelettes. Another one is you take a drinking straw that's kind of an oversized straw, and it actually is a microfilter that will filter out most of the water that gives you giardia and some of those other things that you get that like in Mexico would give you Montezuma's revenge. It'll eliminate most of that in most countries. So you learn to buy some of those things. In my book, I've got a chapter at the end that says recommended packing list, and it lists a good number of those things.
And those are recommendations you can make to anybody who's going to be traveling in those types of countries.
Yeah, it's Appendix B on page 528, packing list for 137 days in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and the Far East.
And can I make a comment? Larry's packing list is a work of art because he travels with less luggage for 4 months around the world than most people take for the weekend away. Yet he's still got all these perfect things in it. And then yet when you see his actual luggage that he hand carries, it's tiny.
Well, that's fantastic. It's finely tuned. You figured out exactly what you need and how much space it will take up.
Well, it really differs, Rich, for each trip. It changes somewhat because of whether you got hot weather. For example, 4 years ago, I went to all of South America and Antarctica and Easter Island, which was absolutely incredible, and then parts of the Caribbean. And for the first part of the trip for Antarctica, I had to have a lot of double skin type membranes and a down jacket and certain type of boots. And then right after, when I'm in South America and it's warm, those things are useless. So you essentially have to put them into a box and mail them back to yourself so they're not taking up unnecessary weight and space. So you learn to be adaptable, and you learn which post offices are efficient and inexpensive, and who can help you in that regard to keep your efficiency up.
You mentioned earlier being a prime sponsor for 60 orphans in Rwanda. Tell me how that came about.
Well, I was on a bus coming northward from Burundi, going in a clockwise circle around Lake Victoria, and met a pastor on the bus, and he just got to talking, and he said, well, where are you staying? And I told him, well, I don't know. I travel freestyle. The only thing I really know about is the airline segments, and those can be a week apart or 2 weeks apart, and then you work your magic in between. That means no reservations, and you don't get a chance to you just wing it. And most of the time it works out really well, but there's times when what's supposed to be a 3-hour bus trip ends up being 12 hours, and you arrive at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you've forgone your chance for dinner, and you have difficulty finding a hotel or a hostel. So I was on one of those trips, and this guy said, well, why don't you just stay with us? And I thought, wow, yeah, absolutely, of course. And so I ended up staying with him for my 3 days in Rwanda. And my primary objectives was to see the Genocide Museum from the genocide that took place in Rwanda in 1994 that killed 1 million people. And I really didn't have much else that I knew about or wanted to see. One nice thing, however, of course, is that the locals will always fill you in. If you've got a blank slate, you can always count on the locals, and that whether that's a restaurant or a place to stay or some sightseeing venue that you really should take advantage of, the locals are always your best source. So
Larry,
I stayed with him. Sorry?
We have a new caller here, Central Pennsylvania. You're on the line.
Hi, Rich. It's Becky.
Hi, Becky. How are you this evening?
Good. How's everyone today?
Doing
Hi,
great.
Becky. Doing really well. I just watched Shakespeare in the Park in Seattle.
Awesome. Seattle's a wonderful city.
I agree.
Becky, did you have a question or a comment for Lawrence tonight?
Not yet. I have to get caught up a little bit, so let me listen for a while, and I'll just jump right in.
Sounds fantastic. Okay,
Sounds good.
Lawrence, go ahead with what you were saying in the Rwanda story.
Well, the pastor was Pastor Eric, and he had a church which is little more than a cow pen, and metal roof, dung, wad and dabble sides, the type that they used in England 500 years ago. And it was hot, and there's no protection from rain, from mosquitoes, from insects, from the cold, any of those things. And some orphans found this place on their own, and they went inside to huddle. And then gradually he and his church members started taking care of them. So the time that I encountered them, I think they'd had these kids for upwards of 3 years. And they really had nothing. And I mean nothing. You hear this about how they need so much more. These kids had a few clothes. Most of them didn't have shoes. They were sleeping on a dirt floor. They were eating meals about every other day. They had no toys. So the first thing I did one afternoon is bought them a soccer ball. And you should have seen these kids jump into action. It was so amazing. The way that one girl tried to do a high kick, right, the ball out of another kid's hand. I almost had to give her a red card for her illegal activity if she was on the soccer pitch. But they were completely enthusiastic, though, and they had no toys, they had no books. At 5 o'clock when it became dark, they had no light. They had no solar lights. They had no flashlights. They had no chalkboard to be able to take lessons on or to learn their alphabet or anything like that. So when I was leaving, I left them some money to buy a chalkboard, a sewing machine to fix clothes, food. That was their greatest need. Shoes in some cases, but lots of solar lights and flashlights and things like that so they could extend their day. And, of course, a chalkboard for their lessons. And with the help of generous Facebook readers or followers, since then, and I've been back not quite a year now, but since then, in addition to writing the book, we've been helping them get doors and windows for their church so they don't have the mosquitoes or the cold, and then beds for the kids. The kids were sleeping on bare dirt.